this outcome was a huge victory, not only for the victims, but also for the community as a whole. Hey, Survivor! Welcome to episode 128 of the Vibrant Survivor podcast. In this episode, I'm sharing a real courtroom victory. Yes! That was months in the making. And what survivors can learn about healing, empowerment, and resilience when the judge's ruling is revealed. But first, let's self-regulate with a 4-4-8 breathing exercise. If you'd like. We'll inhale for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 8. Ready? Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. What word would you use to describe how you're feeling in your body right now? Grab your notebook and pen, and let's dig in. Hey, Survivor. Welcome to the Vibrant Survivor podcast. Do you want to disconnect from a narcissistic or toxic situation and heal? Are you Googling how to identify a narcissist, narcissistic abuse, and boundaries? Are you feeling stressed and lonely while trying to avoid being sucked back in and lied to again? Hey, I'm Lesley. As a busy wife and mom, I fell for the lies and manipulations of narcissists. I wasted my time, talents, and money on users who kept moving the goalposts. I wanted real relationships and business opportunities and to enjoy life with my family. Instead, I struggled with anxiety, panic attacks, and insomnia, and I couldn't trust my body or anybody until I took a holistic approach to healing. In this podcast, you'll find tips for healthy living, trauma healing, and boundaries so that you'll have the freedom, confidence, and inner peace to respond, not react, after narcissistic abuse. Take a deep breath in, let it out slowly, and just relax. This time's for you. Survivor, I've shared with you about the juvenile arson trial that I've been attending for months now, basically since the end of last year. And if you'll recall, there was an incident last year, 4th of July, actually it was the 3rd of July technically, where a group of juveniles went to a house, and the house has a barn structure behind it, or had one, and there were several teens hanging out celebrating the holiday. And there was a relationship conflict, and basically a young lady blocked some of these boys, and they decided to show up at her house while she was entertaining her friends in this barn in the loft and chuck these mortars at the building, supposedly to scare them. After a couple of them were thrown, the barn caught fire and burned to the ground. And the teenagers who were inside were scrambling to get out of the building. And it was a massive amount of loss to the family, heirlooms, automobiles, all kinds of equipment, photos, just irreplaceable things, and almost these several teens' lives. Thank goodness no one was seriously hurt, although some of them suffered from smoking inhalation and things of that nature. One of the juveniles, if you'll recall, was in court last year and opted to take a plea agreement, and he pled guilty for his part in this. And the other juvenile that was arrested, he opted to go for the trial. So from about November, December up until this week, there have been a series of hearings as part of this trial to determine this young man's guilt or innocence in the matter. It was a huge victory for the victims and also sent a very strong message to the community at large, especially to the youth. Because, as I'm sure you've seen in the papers and maybe even your own area, our youth are acting out, and it's very sad, very scary. So up until this week, the court atmosphere has been very interesting, but predictable. We've seen a lot of smugness from the defense side, a lack of remorse, an entitled attitude, apathetic, disinterested body language from the juvenile, smirking, laughing from the juvenile and his family and the defense team. This week, justice was finally served, and this juvenile was found guilty on all counts. He was found guilty of arson. He was found guilty of criminal conduct, and he was found guilty of 4 counts of endangerment. Yeah, the truth of the matter is that we already knew, but because he had a right to a fair trial, and I think he had some other goals in terms of trying to get his record cleaned up so that he could perhaps go into the military or apply to some particular program where he could not have a felony on his record. We all, went through this process. I walked this out with the victims, and I could not have been more proud. It was a very emotional time. There was a lot of stress, a lot of re-traumatization of the victims, nervousness and anxiety, because we've seen time and again in a lot of these court hearings that I've attended, the results are not necessarily what people would expect, what the public would want. And a lot of kids are just getting probation, or they're reoffending and ending up back in court again. It's re-traumatizing for the victims, and it's frustrating and unsettling for the community at large, because people have legit concerns about their safety and their well-being, the well-being and safety of their children, some of whom go to school with these kids. So, interestingly enough, this trial had been dragged out for a couple of extra weeks due to some of the schedule conflicts and also some issues with witnesses on the defense side. And the judge was like, we are going to finish on this day, and we're going to wrap this up and move forward. And it was a huge wave of emotion when the ruling came down, and just the way that the judge revealed her decision as she unveiled her thought process and just her processing of the evidence and looking at all angles of the case and kind of taking her time explaining. It was just, I know a lot of us were nervous, but interestingly enough, when she finally revealed her decision, the smirks vanished. There was not a smirk in sight from my perspective, survivor. This outcome was a huge victory, not only for the victims, but also for the community as a whole. There were a lot of people that were following this case, vested, and I got to tell you, it really gave me hope about some future justice in cases like Preston Lord's murder, and also the alleged murderer's case, which I have been following this year. And both of those trials are scheduled for this summer, by the way. A few key things that I noticed to processing justice as a survivor, I think applied in this case. And I saw this while I was sitting in the courtroom and just felt it myself in my own body and in my own mind. One is, be prepared to ride the roller coaster, like of emotions and even physical sensations. You may find that when you are waiting for justice to be served, you've got a pit in your stomach, and your stomach may feel a little upset or be achy. And I know that the victim in this arson case expressed to me that she had this pit in her stomach, and she was really nervous about what the judgment was going to be. You may be feeling anxious, angry, grief, relief, excitement even. And all of these things can show up at different times, show up all at once in just a mass of chaos and confusion internally. You can feel conflicted, like, yay, but on the other hand, oh my gosh, this is so sad. Like, Lives are ruined. Families are being altered as we speak because of some poor choices and with one decision. So it's so important, given that, to block out time for rest, especially the night before. Like if you're facing a decision or anything big like that, like a judgment or justice, blocking out time for rest, blocking out time for reflection, meditation, prayer, and, journaling, being able to just process your thoughts even afterwards, in addition to beforehand. Getting out all of the things out of your head, or, all the possible negative outcomes or results, or just even ill feelings. Like you may be feeling like, I cannot believe this so-and-so like did this to me or whatever, and getting that out beforehand so that you can be ready to receive critical information or news during, say, a hearing. Also, making time for movement, like a long walk, or if you don't have that much time, a short walk, taking your dog for a walk, or a dance break if that's something that moves you or suits you. And making time to celebrate your wins. Seriously, like I took myself out to a cafe after the verdict was delivered in this case yesterday. There was a cute little cafe that's locally owned that I like to go to, and I treated myself to a latte after the hearing was over. So no matter how big or small, it's important to celebrate those wins. And it can be tempting to feel guilty or feel like, oh, I shouldn't celebrate because this other person's life is being destroyed. But you know what? They have to own their stuff, and that's not your fault, and that's not your problem or concern. So celebrate your wins, and especially if you've been on a long road to justice, that is critical. A second key to processing justice as a survivor, and this was so good, is zooming out. Survivor, when I tell you that just the academic in me was just so thrilled with the way that the state prosecutors broke down their closing arguments and handled this case and delivered, their remarks. Chef's kiss. The prosecutors changed my perception, I know, and as I was talking to some other people after the hearing was over, they changed the perception of others in attendance by zooming out during their closing arguments. And it made a complete difference in the way that we saw what we had been staring at for months as evidence. It was amazing. There was a picture specifically of the rubble from the barn burning down after the fire. And we had been staring at this image, staring at it. The victims were getting re-traumatized, looking at all of their things just burnt to a crisp, and, these cars, these antique cars that were destroyed, and all of the things, also thinking about what could have happened if the kids hadn't gotten out of the building in time. But interestingly, the prosecutor was making a point and countering or rebutting the closing statements of the defense, and was pointing out the fact that all this time there was like a photo of the rubble, and there was a video where we were only being shown a small clip of it. So we were looking at, like, say, the garage door of the barn and what was happening underneath the door specifically. And with the rubble, we're just looking at this pile of rubble. But he dialed into it in a way that none of us had considered. And he zoomed out in the video, say, of the barn door, garage door. And he showed us the clip from a wider angle. And he used it to illustrate the fact that there was fire on the top of a certain area of the building that basically solidified the fact that the juvenile had chucked the mortar at the building in a certain area, and that ignited a fire. And because everyone else had been showing the video in such a through a small lens or in a narrowly focused way, we weren't looking at it in context, and it just made a huge difference. The other thing with the picture of the rubble, it was a still photo, like an aerial view of the rubble of the barn having burnt down. And it was interesting because he also, again, he pointed out the importance not only of science and just, what was on the ground and the residue and all of that, but he gave us a little geometry lesson and kind of debunked the findings of a fire expert that was brought in to help the defense with their case. And he said, just basic geometry, when you show your work and go through basic geometry and you look at the building and you look at which parts of the building are still standing the most intact and which ones are more leveled, you can see that this same corner of the building where this thing landed is the one that's the most leveled, and the ones that were not as impacted but still got burnt are still standing mostly the same way that they were before the fire. And it just completely shifted the way that I looked at the picture. I had been staring at the rubble and just getting into the emotions of it all, instead of zooming out and looking at the angles and looking at the context in which the rubble was sitting, to see and to kind of see the bigger story, the bigger picture. And I mean, it was a game changer. And what I realized was that we can apply the same thing in our healing as survivors. And we can also apply this in our relationships. How many times do we get micro-focused on the little nitpick things that the narcissist, or the little digs that the narcissist takes in these abusive relationships that we've been in, and the little things that they do on a day-to-day basis, or maybe it's a moment to moment, hour to hour for you, weekly, whether you're in a custody situation or it's a work situation, but we focus on the micro instead of zooming out and looking at the bigger picture, and we can miss key things. Like, we can be narrowly focused on the ways that the narcissist is taking digs and hurting us on a micro level, but miss how much we've grown, say, for example, in our resilience, or how the narcissist is digging themselves a grave that they're not going to be able to get out of, and they are sealing their own doom. One thing that you could do is journal about 3 times that you focused too narrowly on the pain that was inflicted and missed the bigger picture in terms of your growth personally or professionally, or the narcissist's demise. A third key to processing justice as a survivor is spotting the difference between smart and slick. You are smart. The narcissist is slick. I cannot say enough great things about the brilliance of these state prosecutors that took on this case versus the slick tactics that were deployed by the defense and by the juvenile and that whole camp. Let's talk about the lying, the gaslighting. There were a couple times when the prosecutors pointed out or mentioned times when the juvenile said one thing on the stand under oath, but then there was something else that was said either in video or, that maybe a witness testified to. And definitely I noticed the gaslighting from the defense side in terms of really painting the juvenile to still have a friendship with the teen victims who were in the burning building. And we all knew that that was not the case and that they were not friendly anymore and that the juvenile and his buddies had been blocked. And that was part of what sparked their reaction, this retaliatory behavior. But the way that the defense tried to paint it was like, oh, he wouldn't want to hurt his friends, and they're all friends. And I'm just sitting there going, no, because I had spoken with the young lady whose family owns the barn, and I would say that would be a no. But they really tried to paint that picture and spin that narrative. And then I told you about the smirking and just the laughing and the note passing, and just even when the juvenile was on the stand, his family seemed to really be amused by the way that he ducked and dodged the state prosecutor's questions. And every time he kind of gave them a vague answer, acted like he didn't know the answer or whatever the case was, the parents actually seemed to get a kick out of it and thought it was funny. And those kinds of things can be re-traumatizing for survivors. One thing that I would encourage you to do is to build your tribe of smart people, not slick people. And you want to have a tribe of supporters, people who value truth, integrity, justice, and who are in alignment with who and how you want to be. Oftentimes, unfortunately, but fortunately, we learn hard lessons from our experiences in narcissistic and toxic relationships that show us what not to do or how to pick a friend, and to align ourselves with people, who have good values and are people of good character. That being said, this isn't the end. This family who had this victory yesterday in court, they still have more to do. They still have yet to rebuild on their property. They still have civil cases. And so the justice part isn't the end of the healing, but it's a powerful mile marker. And having support and being able to, on their journey to justice in this particular segment of it, was just powerful, and definitely a testimony to the power of community. And also, I cannot tell you how proud I was with how the mother found her voice and spoke her truth, stood 10 toes down. Just seeing her growth over the course of the last 6 months or so during this trial was just incredible in the midst of all this chaos and drama. And in some ways, she was still being attacked behind the scenes, but still kept showing up. And I know for me, I felt determined to walk this out with her. I know that she and the other victims really appreciated that. It helped them to feel validated, and it helped them to feel less alone. There's a power in community and truth-telling. And even if you don't say a word, sometimes just your quiet presence and loyalty can speak volumes. People notice these things, and it can empower them and encourage them to keep showing up for themselves and even for one another. And I would encourage you, survivor, to do the same, to keep showing up, to keep raising your voice. You will get better. It will get better. It matters. And you are empowering others by just your presence and your perseverance. We don't control the outcomes, but we can control how we show up. Grounded, dressed to kill, or clothed for comfort, fact-focused, persevering, not getting swept up in the emotion of it all, but really looking at it from a practical standpoint and standing firmly in our truth. I'm so proud of this family and their friends as they move forward on their healing journey and through this process. Their victory gives me hope for justice in my own situation and a continued commitment to truth and healing after narcissistic abuse. Remember, when the narcissist faces truth while you face your fear, you shall overcome, and healing is near. Thanks for tuning in, survivor. You can do hard things and inspire others. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey, survivor! Are you tired of feeling exhausted, stressed, lonely, and stuck in narcissistic relationships, and you just want closure and healing? I spent years rationalizing toxic relationships and dysfunctional environments in the name of community, connection, and career. As a result, I wasted my time, talents, and money on users who kept moving the goalposts. One of the worst was an alleged murderer who discarded me after I caught him lying, stopped helping him for free, and held my boundaries. Even though I dodged a bullet, I felt depressed, ashamed, and I doubted myself. I want you to know that you don't have to suffer in silence, feel alone, or crazy anymore. Come and experience the power of creating your own closure without the permission or participation of the narcissist. I've been no contact for over 4 years now, and I've grown personally and professionally. I have more clarity, stronger boundaries. I'm building a life and business that I've always wanted and enjoying real relationships. I know you want to break patterns of getting into toxic relationships, even if you don't mean to. And it feels so good to disconnect from dysfunction, set and hold boundaries, provide closure for myself, and focus on self-care. And to empower my kids to do the same. Go to closurecoachingsession.com right now and get ready to heal after narcissistic abuse. If this podcast has helped you understand who and what you're dealing with, sharpen your discernment, and move forward on your healing journey, share it with another survivor. Help me help others by leaving a review for the show. And let's connect on social. Take a screenshot, share it in your IG stories, find and tag me at The Vibrant Survivor, and I'll share your post too. I look forward to connecting with you on IG and seeing you back here. You're not alone and you're not crazy. Know who you're dealing with, know who you are. Take care and I'll meet you back here next week. Bye-bye.